This is Pintala, a 7-part series written and performed by me, Noah Diamond. Part 5, The Old Jewish Man of Unity. I was a child in the late 1970s and the 1980s, so I did have another religion: Star Wars. In my first decade, other than the Muppets, nothing got to me like the Lucas Galaxy and its already vast presence in films, books, comics, games, toys, and apparel. The Return of the Jedi, understood to be the last new Star Wars movie we would ever see, was released in 1983 when I was 6. And after all that excitement, and the accompanying fusillade of books, games, records, bedding, underwear, toothbrushes, and tumblers, the mania died down and Star Wars kind of went quiet. And in perfect hibernation. And then a great miracle happened. I speak, of course, of the miracle of Spaceballs. I would come to regard the worker of this miracle, who coincidentally was married to the miracle worker, as a personal hero more personal and more heroic than Lucas or Henson or anyone. Born Melvin Kaminsky on a kitchen table in Brownsville, Brooklyn in 1926, he made me want to talk like this. Now, even BS, before Spaceballs, I knew who he was. In fact, he was in the very first movie I ever saw, The Muppet Movie, 1979. He says the word yarmulke in that movie. Also, I knew him as the voice of a baby opposite Marlo Thomas on the record Free to Be You and Me. That goes in the Gen X time capsule, along with The Electric Company, and You Can't Do That on Television. But Spaceballs was something else, and it rocked my 10-year-old world. Yes, at this time I loved 1776, but 1776 did not have a talking mozzarella monster named Pizza the Hut. Spaceballs was the funniest thing I had ever seen. And it was also the greatest Star Wars movie ever made because it had everything Star Wars had, and it was a lot funnier. It was also more Jewish. It was the first thing I saw that mined our ethnicity for laughs in that aggressive way, that Borscht Belt Tumblr, Mel Brooks way. I was already into Mad magazine. My father decided I was ready for Mad when he saw me collecting Garbage Pail Kids. Very often, the humor comes from imposing Jewishness on things that are not, so that identity itself is the punchline. I had not realized, before Spaceballs, how funny it is to be Jewish. I knew that we were funny, and I knew there were a lot of Jewish comedians. I knew about the Marx Brothers, but only from a book. I didn't see their films until I was 12. At 10, in 1987, my big comedy heroes were the Muppets and Bill Cosby. I was memorizing routines from Cosby records and performing them for my friends. If anything, I might have thought it was funnier to be black. And suddenly, here was the 2,000-year-old man himself, painted gold green and fitted with pointy ears as Yogurt. Don't make a fuss, just plain yogurt. Who says, "May the Schwartz be with you." I didn't quite understand why it was funny to call the Force the Schwartz. My mother, I suppose not wanting to tell me that it was basically a dick joke, explained that it was funny because Schwartz is a Jewish name. So here was a ringing endorsement from my mother, no less, of the Mel Brooks principle that Jewish is funny. Toward the end of the 1980s, a revolutionary event took place in my family. We acquired a miraculous device that, if connected to a TV, could play movies from tapes. And if you had the money, you could buy and rent these tapes and see Star Wars or Spaceballs or the Muppet movie at home anytime you feel like it. A whole new world. We were a little behind. Other people we knew had VCRs before we did. And even back in Willington, we would sometimes rent one. We'd rent a VCR and a stack of movies, and that was the weekend. But it was after Willington, after the divorce, when Shayna and Joe and I spent every other weekend with our father in Willimantic, and otherwise lived with our mother in Windsor, and yes, every town in Connecticut does start with W, that I had regular access to VCRs and could embark in earnest on a curriculum that began with a stack of Mel Brooks movies. Both of my parents remarried, and in these two separate households, with these two separate sets of parents and these two separate VCRs, I was introduced to a vast universe of mostly Jewish comedy. My stepfather is Stephen Nessler, one of the greatest fine art photographers who ever lived, a protege and colleague of Ansel Adams and Paul Caponegro. When we met him, Stephen, like most great artists, was doing something else for a living. He was running a pet store in the Holy Land, Bloomfield, Connecticut, and my mother met him because I wanted a parakeet for my 10th birthday. Stephen identified my developing sense of humor and had a knack for selecting movies that hit the spot. Like The Sunshine Boys, where I learned which words are funny and which words are not funny. And so began my Neil Simon period that connected back to Mel Brooks and Sid Caesar and Carl Reiner and Larry Gelbart and your show of shows. I always referred to it the way they did. The show of shows. The show of shows. Another weekend, another stack of videotapes. Danny Kaye in The Court Jester. Gene Wilder and Harrison Ford in The Frisco Kid. Alan Arkin and Carl Reiner in The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. Alan Arkin and Peter Falk in The In-Laws. Serpentine, Shell! Everywhere I turned, there was another superhero of comedy past. These were the Gospels. Where have you been all my life? Jack Benny and George Burns and Fanny Bryce and Jerry Lewis and Victor Borga and Tom Lehrer and Shelley Berman and Lenny Bruce and Mike Nichols and Elaine May and Madeline Kahn and Gilda Radner and Walter Matthau and Andy Kaufman and Robert Klein and Nora Ephron and Billy Crystal and many more. Thank you for being there. During those years in Windsor, there was some effort on my family's part to be active in the community. We did briefly belong to a synagogue, though I don't remember attending services with any regularity. There was also a JCC, a Jewish Community Center, and here's what I remember about that. I was going to this Purim festival at the JCC, and you had to wear a costume. So I thought it would be a good idea to go dressed as a hamantash. This is a triangular cookie with filling. It's associated with the holiday of Purim. So I made this costume for myself, thought it was pretty good, and only when I arrived at the Purim festival and people started reacting did I suddenly understand that I was a 4-foot-tall vagina. I never returned to the JCC, but one night in a raffle at the synagogue, I won a videotape of Jackie Mason's comeback Broadway show of 1986, The World According to Me. This was the only thing of value I ever got in synagogue. The Jackie Mason comeback of the 80s was perfectly timed with my comedy awakening, and for a brief moment he was a real poet. When the comeback kept coming back season after season, there were diminishing returns, and when his brilliance was less blinding, it became harder to ignore the nastiness in his act, especially as the years went by and he publicly devolved into a right-wing troll. It was disappointing to learn that the ethnic humor of his stand-up act was indeed the product of a racist mind. It didn't seem like it had to be that way. As long as he was hilarious and seemed to be kidding, we could think of him as a sort of archivist. The last exponent of a certain school of comedy. You know, Jackie Mason could do those jokes. Nobody else should try. It is undeniable that a good deal of his work is racially or otherwise insensitive. It is equally undeniable that he was touched by comic genius, and The World According to Me is a towering, operatic work. Passages from it still play constantly in my head. And a typical conversation with my father, who is himself a great wit and sometimes stand-up comedian, is often decorated with quotations from Jackie Mason, like, "Did you ever see? I never saw! You call this a table for a man like me?" And, "There's no bigger schmuck on this earth than a Jew with a boat." A year after the Jackie Mason video fell into my hands, I attended a family reunion in that other promised land, the Catskills. This was the family of my father's mother, Grandma Bunny. The reunion took place at the Nevele, and by this time I was reading about the Borscht Belt, and I knew that the Nevele was one of those old hotels that old comedians talked about. It was the late 80s, and the Catskill resorts were well past their heyday, but it all still existed. You could still go and have some version of the classic Catskills summer. There was a powerful sense of faded glamour about the Nevele in 1989, but of course I found that romantic. That dining room was no joke, by which I mean it was every joke you've ever heard. Piles and piles of Jewish food served with a smile and an insult by elderly waiters in bow ties. I wasn't interested in any of the organized activities, but I savored the proximity to a comedy legacy. I wandered the grounds thinking about Mel Brooks and Sid Caesar. My father took me to a show at the Stardust Room, a corny comic and a sexy singer, and even prevailed upon somebody to let me perform 10 minutes of stand-up at a family event the next day, enabling me to say ever after that I played the Nevele. You want to talk about the Borscht Belt? Well, that was my training ground. My interest in comedy and comedians developed in tandem with my interest in the related world of Broadway and musical theater. Everything happened at once. The year I was first exposed to Fiddler on the Roof was also the year I saw my first Marx Brothers movies. That was the year I finished 6th grade, the year I played the Nevele, the year we moved to Florida. That was 1989, the year everything happened. Although the move from Willington to Windsor had been difficult for me, I soon found that I liked being in a more populated, less isolated place. There was an idyllic town center I could ride my bike to, where there was a library and a movie theater and a comic book store and a Friendly's. And by the 6th grade, I finally had a circle of friends and a busy calendar of plays and concerts and projects. I even had, for the first time ever, that most desired and most elusive thing on earth, a girlfriend. Her name was Maria, the most beautiful sound I ever heard, and we sat in Windsor Center, watching trains go by. I felt good about myself in 6th grade. When we moved from Windsor, Connecticut to South Florida, the sudden absence of friends sent me deeper into my own interests and my own bookshelves. For the first 2 years in Florida, we lived in Boca Raton, a town you have to say in the voice of Billy Crystal's Aunt Sheila. Boca Raton. It was not for me. In 1989, South Florida felt like a place with no history, like everything there was new and a little flimsy. There was a rootless, outlaw, Wild West kind of feeling in the air. Everyone you met had relocated from the north, or from the south, which was also to the north. South Florida was out of town.
It's heaven to be here with you, underneath the moon in Florida.
To northerners, of course, the principal characteristic of South Florida is its unrelenting hot and sunny weather. Glorious to some, but unwelcome and oppressive to adolescent me. Yes, having a swimming pool and easy access to the ocean was an exciting novelty that first summer. I swam every day for months, was traumatically attacked by a man-o'-war, and have not had even the slightest desire to be in water since 1989. One thing we noticed immediately is that South Florida was pretty damn Jewish, full of New Yorkers, full of retirees. Despite the tropical climate and extreme suburban sprawl, in some ways it was a New Yorkier place than the woodsy New England of my childhood. Every coral-colored strip mall plaza had a New York-style pizza place and a New York-style bagel place, like Bagel Land, whose menu asked, "If a seagull flies over the sea, what flies over the bay?" Or Bagel Mania, whose ads promised, "Anything you can finagle, we'll put on a bagel." And in what would become my salvation, South Florida had a booming theater scene, whose programming was overwhelmingly New York and Jewish. You could see the complete works of Neil Simon just driving around South Florida. Kaufman and Hart were in the tap water, and Jules Pfeiffer, and of course Fiddler on the Roof, A Crossing Delancey here, A Heidi Chronicles there, and all the home-cooked shows with culinary titles. The Kugel Follies, Someday My Blintz Will Come, A Knish to Build a Dream On. And then there was a theatrical phenomenon, a solo show by Avi Hoffman entitled Too Jewish. This was a brilliant crowd pleaser, later seen in New York and on PBS. But for a long time before that, it seemed like a more or less permanent attraction at the Broward Stage Door Theater in Coral Springs. I found it inspiring, but the joys and Jews of the South Florida theater scene would not reveal themselves to me right away. When I began my first year of school in Boca Raton, it was immediately clear that I was in a different demographic world than the one I was used to. I had gone from being the only Jewish kid in my class in Willington to being one of a few in Windsor. In Boca Raton, well, we were still a minority, but there was simply not the same outsider status. Also, since it never snowed in the winter, it never felt like Christmas anyway. Curiously, in this place where Jewishness was more normal, I experienced dramatically more anti-Semitism. In Connecticut, it had been limited to the occasional remark by a school bully, or maybe an innocently demeaning comment from a peer who feared for my soul. I was picked on in Willington and Windsor. Occasionally there were fights. But not until the 7th grade in Boca Raton did I have a truly concerning, ongoing problem with bullies. At Lumberjack Middle School, being tormented by your peers was part of the curriculum. The class, hilariously referred to as physical education, had been bad enough in elementary school, where a perfectly civilized day of reading and writing and art and music would suddenly be plunged into the barbaric chaos of dodgeball, or soccer, or some other, to me, moronic activity. But at Lumberjack Middle School, even the flimsy pretense of playing a game was totally absent. Phys ed in this context meant putting on a pair of tiny, school-provided shorts, and I mean, this was not a garment, it was a sex crime, and an athletic tee in the school colors branded with the school logo, degrading and humiliating, and going outside and running around a track for an hour. A man I could never bring myself to address as coach would sit there reading the newspaper, or more likely looking at the pictures in the newspaper, or he would disappear altogether. I don't think he ever did anything that could be called coaching, unless he was privately taking the bigger kids aside now and then to give them tips on how to more effectively torment the smaller kids, and he probably was. It's hard to convey the confusion and hostility I felt, that the already loathsome and pointless burden of compulsory school attendance included this inexplicable hour when a system charged with the sacred responsibility of educating us was instead making us literally run around in circles. And in this basically unsupervised setting, I was a particular target for abuse. These guys, 4 or 5 of them, would get around the track a lot faster than I would, and every time around, each of them would hit or kick or shove or trip me, or grab my nipples and twist them, or scream in my ear. And a lot of this was accompanied by verbal abuse. Only some of it was intelligible, but of that portion, some was definitely racist. Jew, little Jew, fat Jew, dumb Jew. Here, have some matzah, Jew, accompanied by a fist. The abuses of the track could not possibly have gone unnoticed, even by the very dim adult who was sometimes present. He was undoubtedly one of those people who think it's normal and healthy for boys to beat each other up, that this is just part of being a boy, rather than what it really is, part of being an asshole. Someone who thinks cruelty is good for kids would probably say that 12-year-old I was asking for it. I never deliberately antagonized anyone, but I was ideally cast as an object of hatred by the hateful. I was cultivating this personality based on Groucho Marx and Walter Matthau. I was like this little wisecracking old man, and none of those kids ever knew what I was talking about or what to make of me. Academically, it was well behind where I'd left off at the end of 6th grade in Connecticut, and I was aware of this, and I hated Florida, and I had a bad attitude, and I thought I was smarter than everyone, and it probably showed. There were some humiliating conferences with my parents and the principal, resulting in even more humiliating forced apologies, and of course, more severe torment when it was time once again for physical education. Something had to be done. There was some talk of skipping a grade, but I didn't think being a year younger than all my classmates was going to help. Mom and Stephen had already reluctantly enrolled my sister and brother in a private school. Their reluctance was not only because we couldn't really afford it, but because of an abiding commitment to the ideal of public school. We'd always gone to good public schools up north, and all 4 of my parents and step-parents had worked in public schools for at least part of their working lives. So had Grandma Red and Aunt Sarah and Grandpa Norm. My father taught high school English for 30 years. Private school, even the words, the phrase private school, sounded like something my family wouldn't be involved with. Like the phrase lacrosse team or pig roast. But I took some tests and gave some interviews in the process of applying to the middle school that was associated with the elementary school my sister and brother were already attending. The middle school was new, created for a specific group of students who had graduated from the elementary school. I rather liked the idea of never having to see Lumberjack Middle School or anyone associated with it ever again, and instead to be one of 8 students learning more in a more comfortable, less dangerous environment. I remember the day I stayed home from school in order to receive the phone call that would tell me whether I was accepted, and therefore where I'd be going to school the following day. I'll never forget the way that felt, waiting for a phone call that would determine whether I would be beaten up tomorrow. Of course, the problem with private schools is that they're not public schools. But at 12 or 13, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about the worst possibility a private school might offer, which was, in my mind at the time, a uniform policy. Always a deal breaker. But to my immense relief, this particular private middle school had no uniform policy. But here's something I'll bet you weren't expecting. Welcome to Unity, Church and School, Delray Beach, Florida. The sanctuary was the auditorium. There were Jesus books in there. I was going to a Christian school. Well, you know, kind of. This was unity, not to be confused with Unitarianism, which believes in 2 gods in one rather than 1 God in 3, and also not to be confused with Unitarian Universalism, which is the next best thing to no religion at all. Unity is a non-denominational Christian church, relatively liberal and non-dogmatic, and it played an important role in the mid-20th century development of the Montessori method of education. There was no religious content in the school curriculum. and the church and the school had separate staffs and separate offices, and there was nothing religious about the experience except for that auditorium and the sign that said Unity, Church and School. But here's a funny thing about the year and 3/4 I spent at Unity, Church and School. I was very comfortably Jewish there. For one thing, I was not the only Jewish kid in my class. The other was Justin, a great guy who everyone loved. He was the star of the school, an athlete, a musician, smart, funny. Like me, he had younger siblings who were attending Unity Elementary. I think he was pleased that the Jewish population of the 7th grade was doubling, and he did a lot to make me feel welcome. There were now 8 students in our grade, so 2 Jews was 25%, not bad. Justin's family was more religious than mine. They belonged to a synagogue. He was studying for his bar mitzvah. And it was still, somehow, 1989. And it would obviously be 1989 forever. I was in my Tevye period and bursting with the Marx Brothers and Mel Brooks and Neil Simon and Jackie Mason. I was reading Leo Roston and Shalom Aleichem. I was pretty happy about all this. I really made it part of my act. The desire to be a little old man with a Yiddish accent was overwhelming. So I invented a character named Irving Horowitz, and I stayed in character for weeks and weeks. My mother, with gentle concern, said, "Oh, sweetheart, I don't think you want to be the old Jewish man of Unity." But I did. I did want to be the old Jewish man of Unity. And so I was. Sometimes Justin and I would address one another as my fellow Jew. "Good morning, my fellow Jew. What are you having for lunch today, my fellow Jew?" Giving a little presentation about Passover to the class, which had been an acute embarrassment years ago in Willington, was suddenly fun. Everyone looked forward to the big Passover presentation, knowing we'd make it funny and entertaining. It was a big hit, and later, at lunchtime, we thought it would be fun to have a sip from the bottle of kosher for Passover Manischewitz wine we'd brought in as a prop. One of the faculty walked by and saw that the bottle had been opened, and suddenly all hell broke loose at Unity Middle School. Never mind that we're talking about a tablespoon of the most benign wine on earth. This was nothing less than the abuse of alcohol by minors on school grounds, and it was treated with all the seriousness of a court-martial. I really thought they might hang us. I did not think we'd done anything so wrong, but the intensity of the response, first from one teacher, then from the whole middle school faculty, and then from the principal, made me wonder if I really had committed some terrible offense. Was I a monster? Was this innocuous incident really a fork in the road that would lead me either to success and happiness or to lying in a gutter somewhere with a brown paper bag full of Manischewitz and matzah? After a severe talking to from several adults expressing disappointment and disgust and betrayal with vague references to yet undetermined disciplinary measures, I felt chastised into a state of abject shame. And now I was terrified to tell my parents. Stephen, to his eternal credit, listened to my tearful tale and said, "Well, Noah, I think you're going to have to walk into the principal's office tomorrow morning and say, 'I'm a fucking drunkard.'" After 8th grade, there was no Unity High School for me to attend, and I think by that time it was enough already. We had moved from Boca Raton to Coral Springs in Broward County, where I would attend a not terrible big public high school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. When I was there, the school was new. I was in the 4th graduating class, and the joke was that they built a school in the Everglades and named it after an environmentalist. Although it wasn't a joke, that's what actually happened. By the time I was 14, I still didn't love Florida, but I had made my peace with it, and I was aware that soon enough I could make my own decisions. So never mind Connecticut, why not live in New York City? Why live anywhere else? I was not a Floridian, I was a pending New Yorker. Just to prove it, I proudly refused to learn to drive a car, even when I was sitting behind the wheel of the car and it was barreling into a concrete sign. It was thanks to my very brief experience as a motorist that the Coral Springs Financial Plaza temporarily became the Oral Springs Financial Plaza. I've been doing that joke for 30 years. Although it wasn't a joke, that's what actually happened. I owed the city some white paint, some gold paint, and some begonias. Probably the biggest reason I was happier in high school is that I was doing theater. I'd been feeling depressed and isolated late in the Unity period, and my mother, knowing what I needed, called the local community playhouse one day and told them her son was interested in theater. Next thing you know, I was in a play. Then I was writing plays and producing them. And as a consequence of these activities, I finally started to form friendships that would outlast the school day. Many of those friendships are still going strong. Since I was discovering meaning and purpose and community, I really didn't need religion. I never resumed Hebrew school in Florida, and I had no interest in a bar mitzvah. It was during my high school years that I began to feel actively critical of religion and eager to talk about it. At the same time, my sense of ethnicity, and especially my identification with Jewish artists, was stronger than ever. Nothing in the Mel Brooks filmography quite prepared me for the 2,000-year-old man. Those records with Brooks and Carl Reiner are about as good as it gets. I memorized every syllable, and I leapt to my feet, hand on my heart, whenever I heard the national anthem of Cave 76. And the galaxy of comedians, playwrights, authors, and songwriters I idolized kept expanding, and it finally came to include the name that I knew had been conspicuous in its absence. One weekend, during a visit to Connecticut, my father and my stepmother, Erica, planned a little VCR film festival for me. First, we saw Annie Hall, a profound series of opening doors. My life was different and better before we were halfway through it. Then, as a sort of measure of the influence of Annie Hall and its creator, we saw the then-recent Nora Ephron and Rob Reiner movie When Harry Met Sally, then Casablanca, to get the references, and finally, Play It Again, Sam. And as a supplement, an audio cassette of the early stand-up comedy act of my newest hero. Chapter 1. He adored Woody Allen. To him, this was more than an important artist or an entertainer with a talent to amuse, in the words of, no, let me start this over. Chapter 1. He loved Woody Allen's work. For him, no filmmaker was anywhere near the same league. Masterpieces like Radio Days and Zelig and Crimes and Misdemeanors and Bullets Over Broadway were not just his greatest films, but the greatest. No filmmaker could ever rank more highly than the master who made Annie Hall, Manhattan, and Hannah and Her Sisters, then correctly dismissed them as not his best work. This Tolstoy of the cinema was, no, you know what? Let's start this over again. Chapter 1. Although he would later regard Woody Allen as a Tolstoy of the cinema, at first it was the stand-up act and the performance style that really impressed him. It was the sound of his voice, his totally original, highly influential, revolutionary melody and rhythm and timing, as a simple and extraordinary comedian. Wait a minute. Chapter 1. There's an old joke. My one regret in life is that I am not someone else. There's an old joke. I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it by not dying. My grandfather, on his deathbed, there's an old joke, sold me this one. I don't mind dying. There's an old joke. joke. I just don't want to
My
be
mother
there when
locked
it
herself in the
happens.
closet
And the
and
joke
took an
is on
overdose
them
of
because
Maja
someone named
Strictly.
Albert
I'm
Schenk
pointing
got
a
a hold of
gub
an ape
at you.
No, you must
Life
be Don
is divided
Francisco's
into the
sister. I gotta
horrible
model
and the
myself after
miserable.
someone.
But you were so beautiful that I got another animal.
He's
Enjoy your
fictional,
film.
but you can't have
Particularly
everything.
the early funny.
It's worse than dog.
I
eat
can't
dog.
make the leap of faith
It's dog
necessary
doesn't
to
believe
believe
my
my
own
own
phone
brother.
calls. My
David
eyes
Greenglass.
are
Exquisite.
How the
I
hell
don't
do
mind
I know
throwing
why there
up
were
into
nuts?
the wind.
I think
I
you're
don't
the
know how
opposite
the
of a
can
paranoid.
opener works.
I think you go around
I
with the
finally get
insane
the rock up to
delusion
the
that
top of the
people
hill.
like you. And then what the hell do I have? A rock on a hill. Chapter 1. He loved the books, records, plays, and films of Woody Allen. To him, this was among the greatest and most rewarding bodies of creative work in human history. And it always would be. I went right into my usual routine, repeating the process I'd been through with Groucho and Mel Brooks and Danny Kaye. In video stores and libraries and on television, I tracked down and endlessly studied every Woody Allen movie. And even in 1991, there were a lot of them. Every book by or about him found its way to my shelf, along with every book referenced in his work. I got a real education following the references in Marx Brothers, Mel Brooks, and Woody Allen movies. I was taken with everything about him, even his name in print, the valleys of the W, the peak of the A, the two O's like a pair of glasses, the two L's like skyscrapers. It was like a little poem, the name that Alan Königsberg had invented for himself in the early 1950s. To a ridiculous degree, I adopted his style and mannerisms. I had already done this a little with other comedy heroes, and a lot with Groucho. But it wasn't practical for me to be Groucho Marx all day long. I didn't have the material. Woody was a different kind of role model because he played a character who was realistic, as well as contemporary. Also, crucially, a character who, although not conventionally attractive or cool, had romantic and physical relationships with interesting and smart and beautiful women. Not coincidentally, I fell in love with his work at a time in my life when romantic and physical relationships with women were becoming an immediate priority. I've spoken elsewhere about my disastrous teenage attempts to attract girls by acting like Groucho Marx. There was no girl in high school in the early 90s who wanted to be told that her eyes shined like the pants of a blue serge suit. I needed a new act. And so if you met me between the ages of 14 and 16, you would have met a teenage boy doing his best to talk and behave and even look as much like Woody Allen as he possibly could. And of course, along with this desire to imitate him in real life, I imitated him in my work. I spent my high school years writing plays that were highly derivative of Woody Allen movies and casting myself in the Allen-esque lead. One of my signature lines from that period was, "I don't believe in reincarnation, but I did in a past life," which is like a Woody Allen joke, except not funny. Part of what I responded to was his ability to be very Jewish and also unreligious. He was the first artist I knew of in film or television who articulated and dramatized atheistic ideas in a way that I found powerful and funny. And he announced his ethnicity just as loudly. Jewish references were always a reliable punchline in the early work, and even non-Jewish references seemed on topic. In Take the Money and Run, he named his character Virgil Starkwell. And it was hilarious that this particular human would have the waspiest name you could think of. The early funny films, if you revisit them now, seem more early and less funny than they used to. But then he hit a streak of relentless creativity rarely if ever equaled. And Jewishness became more than a punchline. Annie Hall is partly about Jewish identity. Extremely funny, but also serious in its portrait of romance between the ultimate neurotic New York Jew and the ultimate neurotic Midwestern Gentile. As the filmography continues, Jewishness and Judaism become an historical and political theme in Zelig, A source of wisdom in Broadway Danny Rose, a nostalgic memory in Radio Days, a setting for moral and philosophical inquiry in Crimes and Misdemeanors, and a repressive force in Deconstructing Harry. Woody Allen as a performer, as a character, is so distinctive and memorable that he eclipses the writer and director. At 16, my first response was the impulse to be that character. But that didn't last long. By the time I was 18, I was so tired of having people tell me I reminded them of Woody Allen that I got contact lenses. But to this day, the absolute beauty of his work matters to me. It's the use of music, the use of rain, the romance of city life, and the past exquisitely evoked. It's the bittersweetness, the poetic vision of those big white skies in Stardust Memories, the rain-swept streets of Rockaway in Radio Days, Bobby Short singing over the skyline at the top of Manhattan Murder Mystery, the floating dance by the Seine in Everyone Says I Love You, the manuscript blowing away in Celebrity, and several thousand of the best jokes ever written. It's been a long time since it was fashionable to love this particular body of work, but no artist has shown me a world I'd rather live in, or done more to make me appreciate the world I do live in. In public statements over the years, Allen has been relentlessly dour about the human condition. He once told an interviewer that the enjoyable parts of life are transient oases in a vast desert of unspeakable gloom. The man has been saying things like that for decades. But the artist is often saying something quite different. Woody the artist shows us a world filled with music and moonlight and love and romance, and Groucho and Louis Armstrong and those incredible apples and pears by Cezanne, and at least the possibility of magic. A possibility felt nowhere more intensely than on the island of Manhattan, a perpetually autumnal wonderland where lovers walk along the pier at sunset, and love is too weak a word for what they feel. I lurve you, I luff you with 2 Fs. It's a town that exists in black and white and pulsates to the great tunes of George Gershwin, where, as a dead man once said, to be alive is to be happy. As those wonderful, terrible adolescent years ground on, there was finally no more need to seek Jewish heroes. The work had been done. Some of my heroes turned out to be Jewish, even though you wouldn't necessarily know it from their work. Stephen Sondheim is as important to me as any artist, but almost nothing in his work is overtly Jewish. Meanwhile, lots of my big heroes turned out not to be Jewish. This didn't have to be a hard lesson to learn. Like Popeye, I am what I am, and ethnicity is not something you have to cultivate. As Mel Brooks had taught me, even Star Wars can be Jewish, if the Schwartz is with you. By the beginning of adulthood, that profound sense of otherness, of exclusion from history, which had prompted me to burst into tears 8 years earlier over the absence of Jewish names on the Declaration of Independence, had evaporated in the South Florida sun. One more life-altering event in the highly consequential year of 1989 was the birth of my sister Liz to my father and my stepmother Erica. 6 years later, as I was graduating from high school, came the arrival of another sister, Stephanie. Liz and Steph, growing up in a household where Jewish and Christian holidays were celebrated side by side, and in a secular way, seemed more comfortable with all of it. Liz and Steph had an awareness of their Jewish background, but they didn't seem alienated or confused by it. Passover was fun. Hanukkah was no less fun than Christmas. Much as it would have pleased Aunt Sarah and Uncle Joe, I was never going to be an exponent of religious Judaism. But through the example set by my pantheon of heroic comedians, playwrights, and songwriters, mainly introduced to me by Sarah's sister, Red, Red's daughter, Cindy, and Cindy's husbands, Steve and Steve, I came to understand that I was part of a Jewish tradition, one that mattered deeply to me, one I could dedicate my life to and aspire to uphold. One evening when I was 20 years old, my first year in New York City, a good friend of mine was telling me about her new boyfriend. "He's Jewish," she said, "but he's like you. He hates being Jewish." I knew exactly what she meant by that. He was Jewish but not religious. He wasn't into it in that sense. But the particular way it was phrased landed hard on my ears. I did not want to be thought of as someone who hated being Jewish. I don't hate what I am, and I bristled at the implication. Maybe it's because self-deprecating humor, like atheism, is so often slapped with that terrible phrase, that thing Uncle Joe said about Woody Allen. "First of all, the man is a self-hating Jew." I am not a self-hating Jew. I have a number of problems and I have ample flaws and shortcomings, but self-hatred isn't one of them. If anything, I might like myself a little too much. But here was one of my best friends, innocently concluding, based on knowing me well, that I hated being Jewish, and I had given her no reason not to think that. I realized then, or I began to realize, that in order to be understood, in order to be seen accurately, and therefore in order to be truly known and truly accepted, I was going to have to find a way to talk about this. I was going to have to deal with it openly, or else let the people around me assume that I hate myself. The words came to me slowly. "I don't hate being Jewish," I said, "but I can stop if it's bothering you." And now I am pleased to present a drama entitled Death in the Catskills. Now, Death in the Catskills is historical fiction. This did not happen, but it could have if a certain 20-year-old and a certain 10-year-old had crossed paths in the Catskill Mountains in the summer of 1946. The scene is a small supply room, little bigger than a closet, located somewhere below Weinstein's majestic bungalow colony. The walls are lined with shelving, packed with jars, cans, boxes, cleaning supplies. It is the summer of 1946. All of a sudden, Melvin Kaminsky bursts into the supply room. He is 20 years old. Assuming himself to be alone, he grabs a broom, pretending it's a microphone. "Hello, ladies and germs! What a beautiful audience! I want to say hello to my girlfriend in the back. Don't bother looking, folks. She's a very hard girl to see. Skinny. I mean, this is a skinny girl. This girl is so skinny, I took her to a restaurant. The waiter said, 'Check your umbrella.' But seriously, folks, I feel so lucky to be here tonight. My doctor gave me 6 months to live. But I couldn't pay my bill, so he gave me another 6 months. Just as I was leaving the doctor's office, they were bringing in an old man on a stretcher. The paramedic says, 'Are you comfortable?' The man says, 'I make a living.'" "Hello? Who's there?"
That's a terrific joke.
"Why don't you show yourself, coward? Who dares disturb the sanctity of Weinstein's majestic bungalow colony storage room? I ain't scared of you. I just got back from Europe. We won that war, thanks to me. Come on out and fight like a man."
Hi.
"Oh, you're just a little kid, huh? Sorry, hope I didn't scare you. I thought you were a German battalion. What are you doing, reading comic books?"
Yes, I'm reading Donald Duck.
"Say, what's your name, kid?"
Alan Konigsberg.
Somehow I suspected it was not Reginald St. Peterson. I'm Melvin Kaminsky. I work here.
Are you a comedian? I heard you doing those jokes.
Thanks for asking. I'm a drummer. Skiddly-bop-bop, a ziggity-beep. But I do whatever they ask me. A busboy, a waiter, a pool tumbler. Sometimes if the drummer is sick, they let me play with the band. And one of these days, the comic will get sick, and they'll let me do the jokes. I could be very successful if everyone else would just get sick. I'm thinking of poisoning the food.
So, can I ask, what's a pool tumbler?
You know, the tumbler, the lunatic, the nut, who hangs around by the swimming pool to amuse the guests. You do anything for a laugh. You kill yourself if it's funny. Now listen, kid, I am just here looking for napkins. But as a good Jewish boy and a great American war hero, it would be irresponsible of me not to ask if your parents know where you are.
Yeah, my parents could care less. They're having a great time in the mountains, and I'm totally miserable. There's nothing to see, there's no place to take a walk. You got ticks and bugs and vermin.
You're on vacation with your family?
Actually, I'm really here to do my magic act. I have a little magic act I do in the neighborhood. And a friend said I might be able to perform in the talent show. So my mother said we could go.
Well, good luck to you, kid. I have a mission with the napkins, and I dare not rest until Mrs. Moskowitz has something around her neck to catch the crumbs besides Mr. Moskowitz. Now, Alan, did you happen to see a big box marked napkins?
Oh, yes. I think they're over here, behind the door. Here you go. Let me get them for you.
Well, it seems poor Mrs. Moskowitz shall not have her napkins anytime soon.
Why?
Because you let the door close, and now we are locked in.
What? Locked in? Oh, no. Hey! Hey!
Hey, kid, calm down. It's okay.
Okay? I don't want to die in here. I can't die this close to an immense jar of horseradish.
It's okay, kid. Someone will come along.
I can't breathe. I'm hysterical.
You're making me hysterical. Calm down, will you?
I'm calm. I'm calm. I'm under control.
By now, Mrs. Moskowitz is buried under a mountain of crumbs. Poor Sidney is combing through the crumbs with a lantern. Phyllis, where are you?
So let me ask you something. The staff here, how often do they use this supply closet?
Well, on stock days, see, somebody's in here every 2 hours. But on non-stock days, nobody comes anywhere near this closet, except for the head waiter at 5:45.
And what are you telling me? Is today a stock day?
No. Stock day is the third Tuesday of every month.
Third Tuesday? That was yesterday.
Yes, sir.
And what time is it right now?
10 after 6.
And why does the head waiter come to this closet at 5:45?
Because Mrs. Moskowitz needs more napkins.
You're the head waiter.
Tonight I'm the head waiter. Although under the circumstances, you might say more accurately that nobody is the head waiter.
My parents won't know I'm missing till they go home and realize they aren't hitting anyone.
Hey, wait a minute. I forgot something that's in this closet. I think in these crates. Yes, sir, ladies and gentlemen. Celery.
What?
Celery, the Jewish champagne. There's cases of the stuff. Alan, we're saved.
I don't understand. How are we saved?
So, maybe not saved, but at least we can have a celery.
God bless.
To your health. Celery soda. Like the Jews haven't suffered enough.
Oh, shit.
What the hell was that?
It sounded like breaking glass, and then someone saying, oh, shit.
I think someone's back there.
Nobody could have gotten in. Although if they could, maybe we could get out.
Yes, unless they murder us. Tell you what, you go check it out. I'll assume the fleeing position.
Hey, say something encouraging.
The universe is expanding.
Whoa. Christ.
Oh my God, it's the Grim Reaper.
I am death.
Death?
Yes. Death.
Right, gotcha. Right, you're death. That's fabulous. So, I'm Melvin Kaminsky. This is Alan Konigsberg. What can we do for you, Death?
You got a bottle opener for this celery?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. That really hits the spot.
The best. So, listen, Death, we're sort of stuck here. Can you help us out?
Yes, I can help you out.
No, don't do it. This is death. Death, don't you get it? The void, the darkness, the infinite nothingness, not to exist.
Are you from the old neighborhood? You know, kid, the whole world is from Brooklyn. You'd be amazed how many guys I met in the army who lived 2 blocks from me. You're from Brooklyn, right, kid?
Yeah, Midwood.
Williamsburg.
Canarsie.
See, nothing to worry about. We're just 3 guys from Brooklyn in a storage room in the mountains drinking celery.
Yeah, nothing to worry about, except he is death.
I am death.
Yeah, but are you the death?
When your time is up, I lay an icy finger on your shoulder and escort you to eternal silence.
I have so many questions. I have just a few things I'd like to... For instance, is there a God? And after death, do we remain conscious in an afterlife? And if so, can we order Chinese food?
These are the wrong questions.
What happens to us? Is it a violent death? Are we hurt?
Yes, or is it a delightful, adorable, ticklish little death?
Is it true that when a person is dying, his life flashes before his eyes?
Does life go on without us? And if so, how will we know?
And if not, how will we know?
I cannot answer your questions. I do not appear in this world to explain the secrets of eternity. I take what must be taken. And so...
Oh my God!
Death, you just summoned a lightning bolt and melted the door.
I have to get upstairs. That's why I'm here. Phyllis Moskowitz is choking to death on some crumbs. Some asshole didn't bring her a napkin. Well, I'll see you boys some other time. You can count on it.
Goodbye, Death. Well, that worked out nicely. You know what that was? That was a near-death experience.
That was practically a sitting in death's lap experience.
Well, kid, Alan, it's really been a pleasure, I have to say, to sit here in death's lap with you. You're a smart, funny kid, and I like you. And maybe we'll meet again someday, before we meet him again someday.
You bet. Thanks for the celery.
So goodbye.
Yes, shall we go?
Yes, let's go. They do not move.
Mademoiselle, you gave me a Barak Hotel, Spendrick is my name. Veres is nog niet gevindt, door Spendrick nog niet gezien, door really that's a shame. Ich miss euch alle Sorgen, ich kann mich nicht verklogen, in Amerika ist Spendrick allerlei. Ich bin ein Gachwatzki, a Spendrick Lasatski, a jeder kann mich hin, a jeder schreit. Hello, Spendrick, how do you know? Hello, Spendrick, how is by you? Bekannt bin ich sehr gut, auf jeden dritten Tritt, nicht weit mir noch ein Schritt. Hello, Spendrick, how is your chef? Hello, Spendrick, wenn mit ihr trefft, Indianer, Mexikaner, Amerikaner, Galicianer, alle schreien, Spendrick, hello.
Thanks for listening to part 5 of Pintala, a 7-part series. The beautiful music you're listening to right now is Hello Schmendrick from the Yiddish musical of the same name, written by Joseph Rumshinsky and recorded by Morris Goldstein in 1921. Other music heard in this episode includes Hava Nagila and By Mir Bis Duchesne from Tikva Records, By Mir Bis Duchesne recorded by Emil Stern, Florida, The Moon and You recorded by Carl Fenton's Orchestra, and Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin, recorded by Jason Weinberger and the Waterloo Cedar Falls Symphony. You also heard Broadway Bigwig by Art and Robin Munson, Me and My Mullet by Felipe Adorno Vassau. Brookline Chairlift by Steve Rice. What a Friend We Have in Jesus, recorded by Mike Fielding. And Back to the 40s by Andrea Damiano. Licensed from the Pond 5 Media Collection. The national anthem of Cave 76 is on the LP 2000 Years with Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. Woody Allen's line about the vast desert of unspeakable gloom is from an interview with Terry Gross on Fresh Air, National Public Radio, January 27th, 2012. Notes and links to these and other resources, including a source for every quote in this episode, and a comments thread where you can express your opinions, can be found at noahdiamond.com/Pintala.
Hallo Spendrik, mijn naam is Erik. Hallo Spendrik, ik heb je vlieg op nog gekregen, tegen liggen alle prisoners omgekregen. Hallo, brother, Spendrik, hallo.